Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you all who participate in this pioneering new event called SciFaiR or SciFaiR, Science, Faith and Religion. I would like to set the scene in a very brief introductory talk to you in the hope that we are all on the same page and we would like to contribute to the discussions all in this room with our ideas, thoughts, and with our enthusiasm. So I would like to welcome you and, of course, thank you all, those who are our speakers from far and near. And also I would like to express my sincere thanks to those who helped organizing this meeting and who supported this pioneering initiative, which is one of its kind in Hungary. And of course, I would like to welcome you all as participants, and I hope active participants in this meeting. I sincerely hope that you all will contribute to the discussions and will go home with a good heart and come back in the coming years. And last but not least, I very much hope that this meeting will initiate a lasting event in Hungary, a lasting event, a lasting summit, SciFaiR or SciFaiR summit in the future as well. And there will be torchbearers among us, among the young generations here in this room, and who are not yet here with us, but will learn this initiative, about this initiative, and will be the torchbearers in the future of this whole concept. What are the motivations behind the meeting? And of course, I can say a personal motivation, myself as president of the Hungary Research Network, a medical doctor and a neuroscientist, but I studied equally physics, mathematics, theology and philosophy. I have degrees from all these different disciplines. And it's not a bragging, it's just an expression of personal interest. I am very deeply motivated and interested in the intersection, the interface, in the interactions between science and faith. But I am sure, and I am very deeply convinced, that each of you in this room have the same motivation. That's why we are here today. That's why we are entering into this discussion, into this new endeavor to discuss what is in our soul, what is in our heart, what are the relationships, what is the common in faith and science, in research and in religious approaches. And of course, there is another major motivation. We at the HUN-REN Hungarian Research Network are firmly believing in the fact that science on its own, research on its own, is just a one-legged person. One-legged person and who needs another leg, because the reality, the greater reality, is more than just what we see, more than just what we touch. We all know that. And we need to extend our scope of research. We need to enter into discussions with those who use different methodologies, who use different approaches in finding the truth. And that's why it is our task and duty in the Hungarian Research Network to open up our doors to new initiatives and enter into discussions with truth seekers using other methodologies. And last but not least, I hope that this meeting is already a living commitment to maintain a dialogue between science and faith, not only in the present, but in the future as well. I would like to define briefly, very briefly, because it is not needed in this circle. It is not needed in our present convention. The terms of reference. Of course, SciFaiR is a word created by Professor Balázs, consisting of the three major components of the thoughts of the concept behind the present meeting: science, faith, and religion. And needless to say, we all know, we all believe that these inquiries, the inquiry defined by the methodology of science, the inquiry defined by the methodology of faith and religions, converge, because they all question about our very existence. Who am I? Where have I come from? And where I'm going to? Why is there evil? What's there after this life? And we can continue the questions. And I have to reveal that I was also motivated by the Fides et Ratio encyclical by John Paul II, which is in a way a guiding principle in modern times for those who would like to enter into discussions about these questions. What are the objectives and expectations of this SciFaiR summit? I very much hope that we will do in the coming 2 days a kind of a landscaping exercise. Where are we now regarding these questions? Where is philosophy, theology, and natural sciences are in our times when discussing these questions? What are the main topics? What are the main challenges? So we'd like to analyze the main topics and the main challenges in the field. And of course, we'd like to give an orientation to those who are here present with us, because we would like to understand a bit better the challenges, but also the ways to tackle these challenges in the future. And last but not least, as I have already mentioned this morning, we would like to establish and host in the future an ongoing dialogue in Budapest, an ongoing SciFaiR summit in the coming years as well. Now, just to set the scene, we all know that the major Judeo-Christian tradition in Europe, or if we extend it to the main Abrahamic religions, they are all deeply interested in seeking the truth, in understanding the world, in understanding nature in general, understanding human nature in particular. And this can be traced back to the Torah, the Old Testament already. The mitzvah in Genesis 1:28 says, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it," which is also not only a command to subdue, but a command to understand the natural world. And this, of course, has reached a further development in Christianity. And we talk about, of course, especially since Aquinas and the scholastic period, the Lumen Rationis Naturalis and the Lumen Fidei as two approaches, two methodologies to the truth. And needless to say, in the third Abrahamic religion, in Islam, there is also a keen interest in developing scientific approaches to understand the world in a more detail. And of course, in the Eastern traditions, be it Taoism, be it Confucianism, Hinduism, or Buddhism, there are strong emphasis in each of these religions or cultural, philosophical, ethical traditions, strong emphasis on understanding the world better and doing research with proper methodologies defined by these cultural, religious systems. And of course, if we go back to our Judeo-Christian Western tradition, there is an endless literature. There are libraries filled with books which were written on this topic, and we cannot invent the wheel again. We have been discussing these issues for centuries in the past. Just to understand a bit better the overall landscape, we can follow different classifications, we can define the different schools or the different trends in the field according to different philosophical or classification concepts. But I would say the best I have found in my studies and in the literature is that of Ian Barbour's four-field classification, in which Ian Barbour defined in his classical books on the field on this topic a fourfold, say, classification of the different models or theories about the interaction between science and faith. And allow me just to briefly survey his fourfold classification for those who are not familiar with that. Barbour talks about these four models: a conflict model, an independence model, a dialogue model, and an integration model. And these four models can be traced back to centuries. It can be traced back actually to the Renaissance era, to Enlightenment, to the era of Galileo or Darwin. And by the end of the 19th century, this conflict model reached its eclipse when books like that of Diepe or Wallace were talking about conflicts, even wars, battles and wars between the two domains, the two realms, that of science and that of religion. And of course, these models had extremes, or according to these models, the representatives of this model had extreme views. Scientific materialism as a model which we in Hungary, in my childhood, in the communist era, we learned as scientific materialism, socialist materialism or Marxist materialism was one extreme, defining the reality as we see it, and that's it, nothing beyond it. There is no other reality, just matter and energy. And of course, it was both an epistemological and an ontological approach, whereas the other opposite in the field, biblical literalism, claimed that the Bible defined already everything, and everything is literally true, which is found in the Torah or the Bible. The other major model, according to Barbour, is the independence model. There are two major realms, two major realities, both having ontological differences, and the study of both of each has methodological differences and their own methodological approaches and language use. So these two separate jurisdictions, or magisteria as some call it, are independent but legitimate realms of our scientific or methodological inquiries. Some major figures in the field, Stephen Jay Gould, who talks about non-overlapping magisteria, or Alistair, who will be our next speaker, or next speaker, Alistair McGrath, who talks about partially overlapping magisteria regarding science and belief fields. And of course, very important to talk about a famous theologian who is a representative of the independence model, Karl Barth, who clearly defines the two fields which are based on different methodological approaches, use different languages, but are on their own both legitimate realms of our scientific investigation. Now, the next model which Barbour defines is the dialogue model. There are two realities, two scientific targets, that of science, that of faith, but they have different approaches, different methodologies, different languages, but they can enter into a dialogue because the conditions to enter into a dialogue are appropriate conditions and are feasible for both parties, those who use the methodology of science, the language of science, and those who use the language of faith or religious systems. And Pannenberg, Rahner, Michael Polanyi, a Hungarian on the list, and of course, John Polkinghorne from Cambridge are leading representatives of this approach. And last but not least, the final model which Barbour defines is the integration model, that these two realities can be approached with the same methodology. The same language can be used because they are part of the same reality, the visible, the touchable, the understandable, and the reality, the greater reality, which we not necessarily see, but we experience, and we have other ways to approach it. And the three major parts, the three major approaches within this area, within this model, are that of Richard Swinburne, and I was happy to hear from Andrew that Richard is still going, not strong, but fairly well. I'm very happy to hear, because I worked with Richard for a while. And of course, the great icon for many of us, Teilhard de Chardin, and last but not least, Whitehead, the founder, the father of process philosophy and process theology. So if we just think about these four possible models of the existing philosophies or schools of thought in the field, we can immediately realize this is an extremely rich field and an extremely rich discussion which goes on already in the field, goes on for centuries in the field. But let me just conclude, and this is my final slide for today, with a very personal slide. During my different studies, I have always been thinking about what are the greatest scientific or cognitive achievements of humankind in modern times. And I try to put up on my list, on my sort of little pyramid, hierarchical arrangement of the greatest discoveries, the greatest paradigm shifts in modern scientific thought, starting with the antisepsis in medicine and the different equations which describe the world, the physical world, in great details. And of course, for me, in this list, I put the relativity theory at the highest level because this is a construction, a fantastic construction. Of course, not Einstein alone, but the various hyperbolic geometry and so on behind it. But when I was thinking about that, I necessarily and unavoidable put the dogma of the Trinity as, in my humble opinion, one of the greatest cognitive, intellectual achievements of modern science, because we call it definitely a theological science which created this fantastic construction, one of the superb construction of the human mind. But to be just enough, I have to put next to it, from the Abrahamic religions, two other fantastic constructions. From the Torah, from Judaism, the fact that it introduced the analogia entis concept. Perhaps it was not called it as analogia entis, ens analogy, or analogy of being, but it was the foundation, one of the greatest achievements in humankind. And from Islam, I necessarily have to put the Kalam cosmological argument as another unbelievable great scientific achievement. So it is just my humble way of thinking about these questions, but I have to share it with you and tell you, indeed, in the history of human intellect, in the history of human thought, in the past 2,500 years, scientific discoveries and other intellectual discoveries went on hand in hand. They were not alienated from each other. They were and they are forming a unified construction of the great achievements of the human mind. And I'm 100% sure and fully convinced that this development, the building up of the human mind's construction, the achievements of the human intellect will continue, and we are here to discuss these challenges in the coming 2 days. So thank you again for coming, and thank you for being with us. Thank you.